Hello, app developers, and we have a date with Destiny. We're going to learn how to show and hide the date picker. When you click on this switch, you're going to toggle between the date picker being hidden and the date picker being shown. There'll be a nice little animation which transitions from one to the other. You'll also notice that when the date picker is being shown, the date label is in black. When it's being hidden, the date label is in gray. And along the way, we're going to learn about the tableView heightForRowAt method. We're going to learn how to set the row height to 0 to hide a row. We're going to learn about tableView.beginUpdates and endUpdates to trigger the animation and the change in tableView row heights. We'll learn about the selection attribute and the difference between the selection attribute in tableView cells and table views. It's very different, and it can have drastically different consequences on how your app behaves. Ready for big learning? Let's giddy up. Swift Squad, here is a look at where we are headed. So we're going to work on the interface, and if you get into one of the records, you can see the second section now has a header. It says reminder set, also a switch. It's in the off state, so that's why you don't see it highlighted in green. You see there's a label over to the right that will eventually hold the date and time of any reminder. And when you click on the switch, ho, look what happens. Date picker shows up. Click it again and the date picker hides. What we're doing here is we're just adjusting the height of one of the rows in one of the sections of our table view. When the switch is off, we've got the height set to 0. When the switch is on, we've got the height set to 200. Also notice when the switch is off, the date label text is in gray. It turns black when the reminder switch is back on. And the default state, if you add a new record, is for there to be no reminder set. Now we're also going to need to update our to-do item struct to be able to add a property that keeps track of whether or not the reminder was set. So let's go ahead and build this. So first let's set up the user interface. So I'm going to get into to-do list and open up main storyboard. I'm going to click on my second section. Notice that it says table view section in the attributes inspector. Under the header, I'm just going to type in reminder set. Doesn't matter if it's upper or lowercase because the style I've got selected will put the header in all caps. Now I'm going to change the number of rows in this table view section from 1 to 2. What that does is it duplicates the existing row that's in there with a second date picker. Let's get rid of that. So in the main storyboard, I'll click inside of the section named reminder set, and I'll click in the first table view cell. Get inside the content view. I can see the date picker is in there. I'm going to highlight that and just backspace to delete it. Now if I click in the size inspector, I can't change the height until I click on the table view cell that I want to change the height of. Then I'm going to go up here under row height, and I'm going to change that to 44. That's the standard height. Then I'll click on the library. I'll find a switch and drag that over and plop it over on the left-hand side of this new cell. Then I'll go back up to the library and I'll find a label and I'll plop that over on the right-hand side of this new cell. I'll set auto resizing on this label so that it's anchored on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side. Then in the attribute inspector for the label, I'll set the alignment to right justified, and I'll put in some placeholder text that says 12:12:12, 12:12:12 p.m. Press enter, looks good. Let's get into assistant editor mode. So click to do detail table view controller, option click on main storyboard. These guys are side by side. And whoops, I didn't notice I had 3 rows in here in this table view section. So I'll click back on the table view section and change the rows down to 2. And it looks like in adding the new table view row, my connection with the date picker was broken. So I'm just going to click in the empty circle next to date picker, drag over and release on top of date picker. There's my connection reestablished. Now let's create an IB outlet for the switch. Control drag from the switch into our code. We'll call this reminder switch and click connect. We also need an outlet for this date label. So why don't we control drag over and we'll call this date label. Click connect. Now this reminder switch should also be associated with a new property in our class. And that's because we want to remember for each to-do item, hey, do we have a reminder set for this as well? So let's go over to the to-do item Swift file and let's add a new property in here called reminder set. So we'll just say var reminder set bool. It'll be a boolean that's either true or false, true that's set or false if it's not. And now I'm going to build and run, and I know I'm going to get 2 errors here. I want to show you where those errors are. I've just added a property to my struct, and every place in my code where I've created a new struct, I've not passed in a parameter for this new property, and I need to update those lines now. Now this is the line where if you click on the plus sign, we create an empty new struct that's the new reminder you're about to fill out. And to show you what's changed, I'm going to add the same line, recreating a to-do item just below the line that has the error on it. So I'm going to say to-do item equals capital to-do item, open parentheses to go to the struct factory, and look at what's changed. Code completion has updated the initializer for the to-do item struct, and now it's got a parameter for reminder set, that new Boolean value. So I'll select that and press return. So I'll just grab what I had above for the different parameters that were included, paste them in below, and I'm also going to change this reminder set, my new parameter, to false. And now that I'm properly creating a new to-do item with that new parameter, I can delete the old line and the error goes away. Now I've also got to change this line in prepare for segue. Remember what this does. It takes a look at all of the different interface elements that the user has updated, and then it updates to-do item with any values that are in the interface elements so that it can be used in the other view controller in the unwind function, and that's where we're either adding a new to-do item or updating an existing to-do item. So what I'm going to do is just copy the line with the error in it, paste it above it, and then just add this reminder set parameter afterward. So just before the closing parenthesis, I say comma, reminder set colon. You could have used code completion to recreate this line, but I just went ahead and added the parameter to the end. And I'm going to get the reminder set from that new switch that I just added. So it's going to be reminder switch, and then the parameter that has the value in it is .isOn. And we can see what it says right here in code completion. It says isOn is a Boolean value that determines the on-off state of the switch. That's exactly what we want. Press return. You can now highlight and delete the old line with the error in it. No more errors. Now watch what happens when we build and run, because remember, we just changed the struct, and that changes the underlying structure of our data. It's not the same anymore. We see, first of all, that we don't see any of our old data in the simulator, and we also see down below that there's an error. It says could not load the data. The data couldn't be read because it's missing. Now, we didn't crash our app, but we did get this error when we tried to load data. Let's take a look at the load data function. That's in tableView.controller.swift, and this happens right here in the do try catch. We try to decode the data that we just read in that was saved to our iPhone, or the simulator in this case. And what this is saying is, hey, I'm looking at the data, and you told me it should be an array of to-do item, but the data that I'm looking at doesn't match the struct of to-do item. And that shouldn't surprise you because we just made a change to the structure of the current data. This data that was on our iPhone or on the simulator doesn't have that extra parameter that we just added for reminder set. That's why we get the error. This error isn't bad. It's actually a graceful failing of our code. I'm just going to speed through this and add a bunch of to-do items so that I've got some data in the app. And if we have somebody using this app for the first time, the same error is generated because there's not going to be any file on the iPhone. And again, it's not bad. It shows up the console. The user doesn't see it at all. This is all to be expected. So we get an error. We can't find or decode data in the expected format. What happens next? We've got no data in our app, but the next time you save, you're using the correct file format. If there's anything on your device, it's going to save over that old file with the new data, which is correct. And I'll build and run so that we can see our data shows up here. And just as a reminder, inside of to-do list, the reason why we overwrite any existing files that are there is because in our write statement right here, we use this option no file protection, which just gives us permission to overwrite anything that exists. Now when we run, we see that data that I just added. We also see that there's no error in the console down below. Everything's working. Now next up, we want to change the user interface for this reminder set cell. So if the reminder is not set, we should see that this switch is off. We should also see that the date label to the right is grayed out. Switch it on, we should see the date label turns black. Switch it off, we should see things turn gray. Let's do that now. And by the way, this little error message that popped up down below, it's just because I quit the simulator while Xcode was still debugging behind the scenes. There's no change to my project or code, you can just ignore it. So I'll hide the console, I'll get into to-do detail view controller.swift, and right here in view did load, I'm going to add code to update the reminder switch. So I'll say reminder switch.isOn, remember that sets the state, is equal to to-do item dot reminder set. Then on the next line, I'm going to set up an if statement. And if the reminder switch is on, I'll set the date label text color to black. And if the reminder switch is off, I'll set the date label text color to gray. Now we're not quite ready. If you watch when I build and run right now, we do have the reminder switch and the date label set in view did load. So that's when the to-do item is first loaded in, but it's not working when we toggle the reminder switch. And the reason for that is we don't have any IB action set up for this reminder switch. Let's go ahead and get into assistant editor mode between to-do detail view controller.swift, option click on main storyboard, and we'll create an action for this reminder set switch. So I'll control drag over from the switch just before the last curly in the class. I'll make sure this is set to UI switch, call this reminder switch changed, select connect, and I've got my action. Now I'll give myself some more room, and what do I want to put inside of this new action? Well, this same if statement that I did up here in view did load, the one that toggles when reminder switch is set to either black or gray. And you know what? This is a good opportunity for us to take these 5 lines in the if statement and turn them into one line using the ternary operator. So what we want to set is datelabel.textColor, and we'll say that equals, and then inside parentheses we'll do a ternary operator. We'll say reminder switch.isOn. Either that's true or false. Then the ternary operator says we'll put in a question mark and a colon. In between the question mark and the colon is what this statement should return if the thing to the left of the question mark is true. So if remainder switch.isOn is true, then this statement between the parentheses is going to return .black, which is going to be assigned as the date label text color on the other side of the equal sign. Otherwise, after the colon, it's the false condition. And if remainder switch.isOn is false, we want to return .gray. Either .black or .gray is going to be returned to date label.text color. All 5 lines on just 1 line. Ternary operator. Nice. You can comment out the old code or just delete it. Did you need to use ternary operator? No. If it's easier for you to read the code with those full 5 lines of code in the if statement, you can keep that in. Always err on the side of readability, but you should know how to use the ternary operator. Now I'm going to highlight this one line which toggles back and forth the black and gray, paste that right into my reminder switch changed, and I'm also going to create a function called update user interface. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to cut out these 5 lines that update the user interface that are in view.didLoad. I'm going to paste them into this function. It'll just clean up my code a little bit more and make it more readable. So this is just for organization, readability, maintenance. Make sure you call update user interface right in view.didLoad. Now I'll build and run. Let's see how things look. This first record learn Swift had a reminder set. We see that it's set. It's showing in green. We see date label is in black. Click it. We see the toggle is working perfectly. Cancel out of this. What happens if we add a new item? Everything is grayed out, but we can toggle back and forth to enable the reminder. Looking good. Now, the last thing that we need to do is we need to write code to toggle the row height. Now, if you take a look at this diagram here, we actually have 3 sections with 4 cells total in our table view. And remember, an index path refers to a row's location in a table view based on its row and its section. And this works for both dynamic table view cells as well as static cells like we're using now. So here are our 3 sections in our 4 cells. This first section is section 0, the second one is 1, the third is 2, and this second section has 2 rows in it, row 0 and row 1. Now the one that we want to work with is section 1, row 1. When reminder switch is on, we want to be showing this at full height, which is 200 points. When reminder set is off, we want to shrink the height down to 0, which will effectively hide the cell. Now, how do we do this? We use a table view function, heightForRowAt. This will be called automatically just before the table view appears on screen. Now, if we use this function, it's actually called for every single row in our table. So not only do we have to return the toggled height, which is either 0 or the full height of our date picker, but we also have to return the unchanging height for the other 3 cells. And what we're going to do in here is we're going to take a look at each of the index paths. If it's the index path where we have row 1 and section 1, the one where we toggle, we're going to return either 200 or 0. Now, instead of hard coding 200 in here, it's better practice to get it from the height of the date picker itself. And the way that we could do that is refer to datepicker.frame.height. So even if you were to change the height on the main storyboard, this would get that accurate new height. So we've got our ternary operator in here. We're just returning either 200 or 0. And that's based on the true false for remainder switch.isOn. On 200, off, it's false, return 0. What about our other rows? Well, down here, if the index path.row is section 2, row 0, that's the one with a note. That one ought to have a height of 200. Everything else is the standard height of 44. That's this row here, and that's this row here. We'll eventually set up constants for the index paths and for 244, which is better practice than hard coding the literal values in here. We've used a switch case statement for each of the cases that we're going to consider, and now this is called automatically when the table view is about to show on screen. What if we want to call it when we toggle this switch back and forth? Well, this is the code we need to add. To force the animation and the change of row heights, we just say tableView.beginUpdates and tableView.endUpdates. These are 2 methods that will just go ahead and take care of any changes that we're seeing in adjusting the row heights of the cell. And we'll call this in the IB action when our reminder switch is changed. So let's code this up. Now I'm going to code this table view function in its own extension. It's not absolutely necessary. It's sort of force of habit here. And this extension that I write doesn't have to adopt any of the table view protocols. You don't have to do that when you create static table view controllers. So I'm going to say extension to do detail table view controller, and inside of curly's, I'm going to type in heightForRowAt. I've got two to choose from in here. The one I'm going to choose is the one that's highlighted that says asks the delegate for the height to use for a row in a specific location. Which location? It's passed in via this value called index path. So press return to accept that. Whoops, I gotta type it again. And then inside we've got three different conditions. So we're gonna do a switch case on those conditions. We're gonna switch on the index path. The index path is the value that iOS needs a height for. Then inside the curlies, we'll create a case for each of these index paths. So the first one will say case, capital index path, open parentheses, and that's because we're creating an index path to compare lowercase index path with. And this is gonna be row 1, section 1, which is that one we're gonna toggle. Put a colon afterward, and after each of the cases, we'll put a return statement in. So in this first statement, we'll return, and it'll be the result of our ternary operator. So we'll say, if remainder switch dot is on, question mark. If it's true, we're going to go into date picker dot frame. This is what code completion says about dot frame. It says the frame rectangle, which describes the view's location and size to its supervisor's coordinate system, and then dot height, which is just the height of that frame rectangle. So that's the true case if reminder switch dot is on is true, then add a colon, and we'll return 0 if reminder switch dot is on is false. Next case statement, we'll check case space capital index path, create that at row 0, section 2. That's the one that holds our notes view. Don't forget the colon after each case statement, and we'll return 200 for that. Now you might wonder, why didn't we just go ahead and get the height of the note view? So could we say noteView.frame.height? We could say that, but since we haven't fixed the height of the note view, and you might not remember, but we used auto resizing to attach the notes view to the height of that particular row. And it gets a little confusing, but we can't set the height of the cell to the height of the cell. And since we don't have a fixed height of the notes view, that would reset the height to just around 44 points, which would shrink this cell. That's no good. So we'll just put in 200 for now, and then we'll set up a constant up top in a bit. If you did set the height of the notes view with a constraint, that would work. If you're curious, you can try this out on your own. If not, just use the code we're showing here. And then for the default case, we'll say default colon, and those are just the two rows that we haven't accounted for yet. So that will be row 0, section 0, and row 0, section 1. And we'll return 44, which is the standard height. So this function that we just wrote is going to execute right around viewDidLoad when the table view first shows, but we've also got to call this whenever we toggle the reminder switch. So up here in reminder switch changed, we're going to put in those two lines, tableView.beginUpdates, and then tableView.endUpdates. Don't forget the open and close parentheses after these methods. And these two table view methods will force heightForRowAt to execute and readjust the row heights if necessary. Now let's build and run, add a new record. Look at that, date picker not showing, reminder set is off, turn reminder set on, there's the date picker, hide, show, hide. We've got this nice animation, cancel out of this, learn Swift, it should be showing and it does, change the world should be showing, let's save this, and go back. It'll change the world. We can see that it's hiding, showing, hiding. Everything is working perfectly, just as we expected. Now, one last thing to do before we finish this video. Instead of having these literals in here for the different index paths and the different return values, let's go ahead and put constants at the top of our code. This way, should we change any of these values, maybe add a cell, change the heights, we can find them right at the top of our code instead of having to hunt through all of our code. So I'll highlight this first index path, row 1, section 1, which is the index path for the date picker. And let's go to the top and I'll create a new constant. Let's call it date picker index path equals, and I'll just paste this in. Then on the next line, why don't we do a let notes text view index path equals, and I'll paste this in, but then I'll change, that's going to be row 0, section 2. And let's do two constants for the row height. So we'll say let notes row height equals 200 and let default row height equal 44. Now, if I were to build and run right now, I'd get an error and wouldn't be able to build. And the reason why isn't as intuitive. So if I option click on these values down here for row height and default height, notice that it says integer. But if we go down here, what is this function heightForRowAt expecting to return? Oh, something called a CG float. Well, what a CG float is it's actually a special data type that is a legacy data type for what's called core graphics. Just what we need to do, though, is we need to make sure that those constants that we've declared are of type CG float. So I'm going to go back up here, and I'm just going to put before notes row height colon CG float. The same thing for default row height. Now if I option click on these values, I can see they're CG floats. And now I can take these constants that I just created and put them in place of those literals in my heightForRowAt function in my extension. Instead of the first index path, I can say it's datePicker index path. The second case is notes text view index path. That's going to return notes row height, and default is going to return default row height. Build and run. Add a new record. Everything is looking great. We have this as a reminder. Go back up here. The reminder is open. If we say this is not a reminder, let's see if it remembers that. And indeed it does. Everything's looking great. You know, there's one other thing that I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to get rid of the gray residual selection that we have here. So we can set this table view cell so that it's not going to show any selection. So for that, there'll be a selection attribute on the table view cell for our table view with dynamic cells. And then there's this. If you click on the first cell in the reminder set, you can see that the selection is actually showing here too. So we'll make sure that you can't do any selection on any of the cells in the static table view. So let's quit out of the simulator, get into the main storyboard. If we go over here first on our to-do list view controller, select on the cell itself, go up into the attributes inspector. Oops, I selected the contact view. Make sure that you selected the cell. And up here you can see that there is a selection. Now take a second to look at this call out up and to the left. I'm going to show you an important difference between a table view cell selection attribute and a table view selection attribute. I've seen this trip up students in the past. One student heartbreakingly confused these during an exam, so you want to make sure that you understand this. Notice that I've got the table view cell attributes inspector up, and I've got selection stating blue. Now, I don't know why, for some reason, even though it says blue, when you click on and select the cells, they turn gray. Now, you often don't want this selection indicator to show up. You still want to be able to select the table view cells, but you just don't want them to be highlighted to show the selection. Well, that's pretty easy to change. Just go under the table view cells attributes and change selection to none. You'll still be able to click on the cells like I'm doing here, and even though that gray selection indicator isn't showing up, you can see that our cells are being selected. Here's where you want to be careful. There's also a selection attribute for the table view itself. So notice my attribute inspector. It doesn't say table view cell anymore. It says table view. I've clicked on the table view. Now the table view also has a selection. And by default, it's single selection, which means you can just select one cell at a time. But if you select no selection, this disables the ability to select any cells in the table view. I'm clicking Build Apps, Be the Change. This has a reminder. This does not have a reminder. None of them is reacting. No selection in the table view disables the ability to make a selection on a cell. So just remember, table view cell is just about the interface. If it's going to show a selection, table view will prevent all selections, and that'll ruin the functionality of our app. So in our to-do list view controller, our scrollable dynamic table view, click on the table view cell, and under selection, select none. That gets rid of the gray selection indicator, but you can still select the cells. Now let's go over to our static table view. That's the to-do detail table view controller, and let's click on the table view itself. Now in this one, it's totally okay for us to set the selection attribute to no selection. I'll still be able to click in all the cells, I just won't have the gray selection showing up. And you can also do this. If you wanted to go back to single selection, you could highlight each of the individual cells in the section. So I'll just expand these in the document outline. And you want to make sure that you're selecting on the table view cells themselves. Command click, command click, command click, all four are selected. Then go over here under selection, select none. It gives you the same effect, but if for some reason you wanted to make sure that you could click and deal with the selection on any of these cells, which we're not doing, you wouldn't disable that ability. So now let's go ahead and build and run. And to make sure that we still have a selection, we'll say change the world. Why don't we change that to be the change, exclamation point, save. It looks like it's changed it. Indeed it has. What if we go ahead and add something? This is a brand new to-do item. And we've got this down here too. Everything is looking good. Can we go ahead and still click on the rows in here? No problem at all. No lingering in here. Just tweak the interface a bit. Swifter, I hope you're feeling really good about your skills. Keep at it.